The smell of scorched beans filled the small boarding house kitchen, and Victoria, Ortega knew before her Aunt Marta even opened her mouth that another lecture was coming. The late afternoon sun of 1876 filtered through the dusty windows of Calico, California, casting harsh light on the pot of blackened disaster that was supposed to be supper for the miners who boarded there. "She cannot cook a decent meal," Aunt Marta declared in Spanish, throwing her hands up toward the ceiling as she stormed into the kitchen. Her voice carried through the entire first floor of the weathered building. "Victoria, how do you expect to find a husband when you cannot even make beans without burning them? Your mother, God rest her soul, would be ashamed." Victoria bit her tongue, fighting back tears as she scraped the ruined beans into the slop bucket. At 20 years old, she had heard this refrain more times than she could count in the 3 years since her parents had died from fever. Aunt Marta had taken her in, but the woman made sure Victoria knew it was a burden. The boarding house in this silver mining town was barely profitable, and every wasted ingredient meant less money in their pockets. "I am sorry, Aunt Marta," Victoria said softly, keeping her eyes down. "I was helping Mrs. Chen with her wash and lost track of time." "Always helping others when you should be taking care of your own household," her aunt snapped. "Start again. The miners will be here in 2 hours expecting food. And this time, watch the pot instead of daydreaming about things that will never happen." Victoria nodded, swallowing her pride as she began pulling out more beans. Her aunt swept out of the kitchen in a flurry of black skirts, leaving Victoria alone with her humiliation. The truth was, Victoria had been helping Mrs. Chen, the Chinese laundress whose husband had been injured in a mine collapse. But more than that, Victoria simply struggled with cooking. Her mother had been an excellent cook, but she had died before teaching Victoria all her secrets. Now, every meal was an anxious gamble. She set the beans to soak and began preparing the cornbread, measuring carefully and whispering a prayer that this batch would not be another disaster. Through the window, she could see the dusty main street of Calico, with its assortment of miners, merchants, and dreamers all seeking their fortune in the unforgiving Mojave Desert landscape. The town had sprung up almost overnight when silver was discovered, and now it bustled with an energy that was both exciting and overwhelming. As the sun began its descent toward the distant mountains, Victoria heard heavy footsteps on the back porch. That would be Mr. Henderson, one of their regular boarders, returning from his shift. But these footsteps sounded different, heavier, more deliberate. She looked up just as a shadow filled the doorway. The man who stood there was unlike anyone Victoria had ever seen in Calico. He had to duck to enter through the doorframe, his massive shoulders nearly as wide as the opening itself. Long, dark hair fell past his collar, and a thick beard covered much of his face, but it could not hide the sharp intelligence in his green eyes. He wore buckskin pants and a heavy shirt that strained against muscles built from years of hard labor in unforgiving wilderness. A large pack rested on his back, and a rifle was slung across his shoulder. "Madam," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "Name is Isaiah Nichols. Heard you might have a room available." Victoria found herself staring and quickly looked away, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "Yes, we have one room left. It is 50 cents a night, includes breakfast and supper." "Fair enough." He shifted the pack on his shoulders. "I will be staying a while. Got business with the mining company." Aunt Marta appeared as if summoned by the sound of potential income. Her eyes widened at the sight of Isaiah, but she quickly composed herself into her usual stern expression. "You are a trapper?" she asked, eyeing his buckskin clothing. "Was. Mountain man mostly. Spent the last 15 years up in the Sierras and beyond. But times are changing. Figured I would try my hand at something else." His gaze moved past Aunt Marta to Victoria, who was stirring the fresh pot of beans with determined focus. "Something smells good." Victoria's head snapped up in surprise. The beans were plain, barely seasoned, nothing special at all. But Isaiah was looking at the pot with what appeared to be genuine interest. Aunt Marta huffed. "My niece is learning. The room is upstairs, third door on the right. Supper is at 6 o'clock sharp. Do not be late." Isaiah nodded, ducking through the doorway into the main house. His heavy footsteps echoed up the stairs, and Victoria heard the creak of floorboards as he settled into the room above the kitchen. "A mountain man," Aunt Marta muttered, shaking her head. "Probably has money from furs. Make sure you cook enough. A man that size will eat plenty." Victoria nodded, already adding more beans to the pot and doubling the cornbread recipe. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked, though she could not say exactly why. Perhaps it was the way Isaiah's eyes had lingered on her for just a moment, without judgment or criticism. Or perhaps it was simply that he represented something wild and free, so different from the confined life she led in this boarding house. By 6 o'clock, the dining room was full. 6 miners, a traveling salesman, old Mr. Henderson, and now Isaiah Nichols all sat around the long wooden table. Aunt Marta presided at one end while Victoria served, ladling beans and chunks of salt pork onto plates alongside the cornbread. The miners complained immediately. "These beans are bland," one said. "Got no flavor at all." "The cornbread is dry," another added. "Mrs. Chen's place serves better food for the same price." Victoria felt her face burn with shame as she returned to the kitchen for more servings. She could hear her aunt's tight voice making excuses, promising tomorrow would be better. It was always the same. Nothing Victoria cooked ever seemed good enough. When she came back with the pot to offer seconds, she was startled to find Isaiah holding out his empty plate. "More, please," he said simply. She stared at him. "You want more?" "Yes, madam. It is good, not fancy but honest food. Reminds me of meals cooked over a campfire after a long day of trapping." One of the miners snorted. "You must have been eating mighty poorly up in those mountains." Isaiah turned his green eyes on the man, and though his expression did not change, something in his gaze made the miner shrink back slightly. "I have eaten bear meat that sat in my pack for 3 days in summer heat. I have made soup from pine bark and leather. This meal here is fine cooking, especially the cornbread. Has a good texture, not too heavy." Victoria filled his plate again, her hand shaking slightly. When she met his eyes, she saw no mockery there, only honesty. He was not flattering her. He genuinely meant what he said. The rest of the meal passed in relative quiet. Isaiah ate 3 full servings, scraping his plate clean each time. The miners eventually stopped complaining and focused on filling their own bellies. When everyone had finished, Aunt Marta collected the payment for the meals while Victoria cleared the table. As Isaiah stood to leave, he paused beside her. "Thank you for the meal, Miss Ortega. It was good." "You do not have to be kind," Victoria said quietly, stacking plates. "I know I am not a good cook. I am not being kind. I am being truthful." He picked up his own plate and cup, carrying them to the kitchen despite her protest. "A person who cooks with care, even if the result is not perfect, is worth 10 fancy cooks who have no heart in their work." Before Victoria could respond, he had left the room, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. She stood in the kitchen, holding dirty dishes, feeling something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it as hope. That night, as she lay in her small room under the eaves, Victoria could hear the sounds of Calico settling down for the evening. Somewhere a piano played in one of the saloons. Dogs barked in the distance. And directly above her, floorboards creaked as Isaiah moved around his room. She found herself wondering about him. What brought a mountain man down from the wilderness? What had he seen in those 15 years of solitude and danger? And why had he been so kind about her cooking when everyone else, including her own aunt, found it lacking? The next morning, Victoria woke before dawn as always. She crept downstairs to start breakfast, determined to do better. She made biscuits, fried salt pork, and scrambled eggs with wild onions she had traded for with a Paiute woman who sometimes came to town. The biscuits came out slightly lopsided, and the eggs were a bit dry, but it was better than her usual efforts. The boarders filtered in one by one. Aunt Marta looked over the breakfast with her usual critical eye, but said nothing. The miners ate quickly, eager to get to their claims before the desert heat became unbearable. Mr. Henderson complimented the onions in the eggs, which made Victoria smile. Isaiah was the last to arrive. He had trimmed his beard slightly and tied his long hair back with a leather cord. In the morning light, Victoria could see he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps in his early 30s. His face bore the weathered look of a man who had spent most of his life outdoors, with fine lines around his eyes from squinting against sun and snow. "Good morning, Miss Ortega," he said, taking a seat at the now empty table. "I apologize for being late. I am not accustomed to keeping town hours." "It is no trouble, Mr. Nichols." Victoria brought him a full plate. "I saved plenty for you." He dug in with obvious appetite, and Victoria found herself lingering nearby, pretending to wipe down the already clean counters. She wanted to see his reaction, though she told herself it should not matter what one boarder thought of her cooking. "These biscuits are good," Isaiah said after a moment. "Light. My mother used to make them similar." "They are crooked," Victoria said before she could stop herself. "Food does not need to be pretty to taste good." He spread butter on another biscuit. "Up in the mountains, I once made bread in a Dutch oven buried in coals. Came out black on one side, raw on the other. But I ate every bit because I had made it myself, and I was proud of the effort." Victoria could not help smiling. "That sounds terrible." It was. His eyes crinkled with amusement. "But it taught me to appreciate any meal that is properly cooked, even if it is not fancy." Aunt Marta swept into the dining room, her sharp eyes taking in the scene of Victoria standing close to Isaiah's table. "Victoria, the washing needs doing. Stop bothering our guests." "She is not bothering me," Isaiah said mildly, but he continued eating and Victoria hurried off to her chores. The day passed in its usual routine of washing, mending, preparing the next meal, and trying to stay out of Aunt Marta's critical line of sight. But Victoria found her thoughts returning again and again to the mountain man upstairs. There was something comforting about his presence, a steadiness that reminded her of her father. That evening's supper was stew, and Victoria watched the pot carefully, stirring regularly and tasting to check the seasoning. She added herbs she had gathered from the hillside, hoping they would improve the flavor. When she served it, the miners were less critical than usual, though one complained the meat was tough. "Tough meat means it was cooked slow and proper," Isaiah said, accepting his second bowl. "This is good stew, Miss Ortega. The herbs are a nice touch. Sage, if I am not mistaken." "Yes," Victoria said, pleased he had noticed. "And a bit of wild thyme. Reminds me of rabbit stew I used to make. There is a meadow up near Yosemite where wild thyme grows thick. I would camp there in summer and cook fresh rabbit with those herbs. This is better, though." "You have a good instinct for flavoring." One of the miners rolled his eyes. "You act like you are eating at some fancy San Francisco restaurant instead of a boarding house in a mining town." I am eating food prepared by someone who cares about doing right, Isaiah replied calmly. That is better than any restaurant. After supper, Isaiah lingered in the dining room rather than retiring to his room or heading out to the saloons like the other men. He sat near the window, working oil into his leather boots while Victoria cleaned up. Aunt Marta had gone to play cards with Mrs. Henderson next door, which meant Victoria could work at her own pace without constant criticism. You said you have business with the mining company, Victoria ventured as she wiped down tables. Are you looking for work in the mines? Isaiah shook his head. No, madam. I am meeting with the owner about supplying fresh meat. The company feeds a lot of workers and they pay well for venison, rabbit, even bear if you can get it. I know these mountains better than most. Figure I can make a living hunting. That makes sense. Better than being underground. Victoria shuddered. My father worked in mines before we came here. He hated it, said it was like being buried alive. It is not for everyone. Isaiah set aside one boot and picked up the other. What brought your family to Calico? Victoria sat down at the far end of the table, grateful for someone to talk to. My parents thought they could open a restaurant. My mother was a wonderful cook. But then the fever came through town 3 years ago. They both died within a week of each other. Aunt Marta took me in, but she resents it. She never wanted children, and now she is stuck with a niece who cannot even cook properly. You cook fine, Isaiah said firmly. Your aunt is wrong to make you feel otherwise. Everyone says my cooking is bad. The miners complain every meal. Miners complain about everything. It is their nature. Isaiah looked up from his work, holding her gaze. I have eaten hundreds of meals in rough conditions, Miss Ortega. I know the difference between bad cooking and simple cooking. Yours is simple, but it is made with care. That counts for more than fancy seasonings. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. She could not remember the last time anyone had defended her or said something genuinely kind. Thank you, she whispered. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, Isaiah working on his boots and Victoria finishing her cleaning. Outside, the sounds of Calico's nightlife drifted through the windows. Someone was singing in the saloon, badly off-key. A dog fight broke out somewhere down the street, then quickly ended. Do you miss the mountains? Victoria asked. Isaiah considered the question. Yes and no, I miss the quiet, the clean air, the sense of being part of something bigger than myself, but I do not miss the loneliness. 15 years is a long time to spend mostly alone. A man starts to forget how to talk to people. You seem to talk fine to me. That is because you listen without judging. He set aside his boots and stood, stretching his broad shoulders. Most people hear mountain man and think I am some kind of savage. Or they expect wild stories about fighting bears and Indians. The truth is much more boring. Mostly I just walked, set traps, and tried not to die. Victoria smiled. I think that sounds fascinating. I have never been more than a day's ride from Calico. What is it like up in the high country? Isaiah's expression softened. Beautiful in ways I cannot quite put into words. There are meadows full of wildflowers that stretch for miles, lakes so clear you can see straight to the bottom, even when they are deep enough to drown in. The air smells like pine and snow, even in summer. And the silence. It is not really silent, you understand. There are birds and wind and water, but it is free of human noise. Sometimes I would go weeks without hearing another person's voice. That sounds lonely. It was, but it was also peaceful. He moved toward the stairs. Thank you for the conversation, Miss Ortega, and for the fine supper. Victoria, she said impulsively. You can call me Victoria. Then you should call me Isaiah. He nodded to her and headed upstairs, leaving Victoria alone in the dining room with a strange warmth in her chest. Over the next few days, a pattern developed. Isaiah would rise early and head out into the surrounding desert and mountains with his rifle. He would return in the afternoon with rabbits, quail, or once a small deer. He sold most of the meat to the mining company, but he always brought some back for Victoria. "For supper," he would say, laying the cleaned game on the kitchen table. "Fresh meat is better than salt pork." Aunt Marta was suspicious at first. "Why are you giving us free meat?" "It is not free. It is payment for good meals and a comfortable room." Isaiah's tone was mild, but there was steel underneath. "Unless you would prefer I keep it all for the mining company." Aunt Marta quickly changed her tune. Fresh meat was expensive in Calico, and Isaiah's contributions saved the boarding house money. She even grudgingly admitted that Victoria's cooking had improved, though she credited the quality of ingredients rather than any skill on her niece's part. The miners noticed the change too. "This rabbit is good," one said, sounding surprised. "Tender, not gamey at all." "Miss Ortega soaked it in buttermilk first," Isaiah said from his seat. "Takes away the wild flavor. Smart cooking." Victoria had not thought it was particularly smart. Her mother had taught her that trick years ago. But hearing Isaiah praise the technique in front of the others made her stand a little taller. Another evening, she attempted to make pie with dried apples. The crust came out tough and the filling was too tart, but Isaiah ate his entire slice and asked for another. "I like tart," he said when Victoria apologized. "Sweet pies never sat well with me. This is good." One of the miners laughed. "Nichols, you would compliment a plate of dirt if Miss Ortega served it." Isaiah turned to look at the man, and though he said nothing, the miner quickly focused on his own plate. Victoria noticed that the miners had learned not to mock Isaiah's compliments. There was something about the mountain man that commanded respect, even from rough men who respected little else. As the days turned into weeks, Victoria found herself looking forward to Isaiah's return each afternoon. He would always come to the kitchen first, bringing whatever game he had caught and staying to talk while she prepared supper. He told her stories about his years in the wilderness, about close calls with grizzly bears and harsh winters spent in crude shelters. He spoke of meeting various Indian tribes, some friendly and some hostile, and learning their ways of surviving in harsh country. In turn, Victoria told him about her life in Calico, about her dreams of one day opening her own small restaurant where she could cook without her aunt's constant criticism. She spoke of her parents and how much she missed them, especially her mother's gentle encouragement. "She used to say that cooking was about love," Victoria said one afternoon as she kneaded bread dough. "That if you made food with love, it would nourish more than just the body." "She was right," Isaiah said. He was sitting at the small kitchen table, sharpening his hunting knife. "I can tell when someone has cooked with care. It tastes different, even if I cannot explain exactly how." Victoria paused in her kneading to look at him. "Why are you so kind to me, Isaiah?" He looked up from his work, green eyes serious. "Because you deserve kindness, Victoria. And because I see how hard you try, even when others do not appreciate it." Their eyes met and held for a long moment. Victoria felt her heart beating faster, and a flush crept up her neck that had nothing to do with the heat of the kitchen. Isaiah's expression was intense but gentle, and she found herself unable to look away. The moment was broken by Aunt Marta's sharp voice from the dining room. "Victoria, the table needs setting." Victoria jumped, returning hastily to her bread dough while Isaiah went back to sharpening his knife. But something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings neither had yet put into words. That evening, a commotion in the street drew everyone to the windows. Two miners were fighting over a card game gone wrong. One pulled a knife, and the situation turned dangerous quickly. The crowd scattered as the men circled each other. Isaiah was out the door before Victoria could blink. He moved with surprising speed for such a large man, crossing the street in long strides. He grabbed the man with the knife from behind, pinning his arms in a grip that looked unbreakable. The knife fell to the dust. "Enough," Isaiah said, his deep voice carrying clearly. "Whatever the dispute, it is not worth dying over." The other miner, seeing his opponent disarmed, backed down quickly. Isaiah released the knife wielder with a slight shove toward the opposite end of the street. "Go cool off, both of you." The miners slunk away in opposite directions while the crowd dispersed, the excitement over. Isaiah picked up the dropped knife and handed it to the town deputy, who had arrived too late to prevent the fight but in time to see Isaiah's intervention. "Obliged, Nichols," the deputy said. "Saved me a mess of paperwork." Isaiah just nodded and returned to the boarding house. Victoria met him at the door, her heart still racing from watching the confrontation. "That was dangerous. He could have turned on you." "He was not going to hurt anyone. Just scared and angry." Isaiah's tone was matter-of-fact. "I have dealt with worse than drunk miners, still." Victoria found herself reaching out to touch his arm, feeling the solid muscle beneath his shirt sleeve. "You could have been hurt." Isaiah looked down at her hand, then up at her face. Something flickered in his eyes, and Victoria suddenly became aware of how close they were standing. She could smell wood smoke and leather and pine on him, a scent that was becoming wonderfully familiar. "Victoria," he said quietly, and the way he said her name made her shiver despite the warm evening. "Yes." He seemed about to say something important, but Aunt Marta appeared in the hallway behind them. "Victoria, stop bothering Mr. Nichols and finish the supper preparations." The moment broke. Isaiah stepped back and Victoria reluctantly returned to the kitchen. But she could feel his eyes on her as she worked, and when she glanced back, he was still standing in the doorway, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. That night, Victoria lay awake listening to the familiar creaks of Isaiah moving around the room above her. She thought about his kindness, his steady presence, the way he defended her cooking when no one else would. She thought about the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her, and the way her heart raced when he was near. She was falling in love with him. The realization should have frightened her, but instead it felt right, as natural as breathing. The question was whether Isaiah felt the same way. The answer came sooner than she expected. 2 days later, Aunt Marta announced she was going to visit her sister in Los Angeles for a week. "I expect you to manage the boarding house while I am gone," she told Victoria sternly. "No burning the food, no letting the miners take advantage, and no inappropriate behavior with the boarders." That last comment was delivered with a pointed look toward the stairs where Isaiah had just gone up to his room. Victoria felt her face heat, but nodded obediently. After Aunt Marta departed on the morning stage, Victoria found herself simultaneously nervous and relieved. Managing the boarding house alone would be challenging, but at least she would not have her aunt's constant criticism in her ear. Isaiah seemed to sense her anxiety. That afternoon, he returned from hunting with 3 fat rabbits and stayed to help her prepare them for cooking. "You cut here," he showed her, his large hands surprisingly deft. "And here, see, gets all the meat off clean." Victoria watched and learned, grateful for his patience. As they worked side by side in the kitchen, she became acutely aware of his presence, of the way his shoulder occasionally brushed hers, of the quiet strength he radiated. "Your aunt is hard on you," Isaiah said after a while. "She took me in when I had nowhere else to go. I owe her." "You owe her gratitude, not your happiness." Isaiah set down his knife and turned to face her fully. "Victoria, can I speak plainly?" Her heart began to race. "Yes. I came to Calico planning to stay a few weeks at most." get my contract with the mining company sorted, then move on to the next town. But I find myself not wanting to leave." His green eyes held hers intently. "And the reason I do not want to leave is you." Victoria's breath caught. "Isaiah, you do not have to say anything right now. I know I am not much of a prospect. A mountain man with no real home, few possessions, and a rough way about him. But I am honest and I work hard. And I would treat you well, Victoria. Better than your aunt treats you. Better than anyone has treated you in a long time." "You are wrong," Victoria said softly, setting down her own knife. "About not being a good prospect. You are kind and strong and you make me feel valued. You are the only person who has ever appreciated my cooking, even when it was truly terrible." Isaiah's weathered face broke into a smile. "It was never terrible. Plain, maybe, but never terrible." Victoria laughed, feeling tears prick her eyes. "I think I am falling in love with you," she admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I did not mean to. I know it is too fast, too soon. But you make me feel things I have never felt before." Isaiah crossed the small space between them in one step. His hands came up to cup her face gently, and Victoria marveled at how tender such large, rough hands could be. "It is not too fast if we both feel it," he said. "I have been alone for 15 years, Victoria. I know what it is like to live without connection, without warmth. And I know when I have found something worth holding on to." He bent his head and kissed her, and Victoria felt the world tilt on its axis. His lips were gentle but firm, his beard soft against her skin. She reached up to grip his shoulders, feeling the solid muscle there, anchoring herself to him. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Isaiah rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly," he said. "With your aunt's permission, if she will give it. And if she will not, then we will figure something else out. But I am not leaving Calico without you, Victoria. Not if you will have me." "I will have you," Victoria whispered. 1,000 times yes, I will have you." They kissed again, longer this time, and Victoria felt 15 years of loneliness fall away from Isaiah, even as her own 3 years of grief and criticism faded into the background. Here was someone who saw her, really saw her, and valued what he found. The rest of the week passed in a golden haze. With Aunt Marta gone, Isaiah and Victoria spent every spare moment together. He taught her how to properly skin and butcher game, how to read weather signs in the clouds, how to identify edible plants in the harsh desert landscape. She taught him songs her mother had sung, showed him how to make tortillas from scratch, shared her dreams of a life beyond the boarding house. In the evenings after the miners had eaten and gone to their rooms or the saloons, Isaiah and Victoria would sit on the back porch and watch the stars come out over the desert mountains. Isaiah would point out constellations and tell her their stories, his deep voice soothing in the darkness. "That one is Ursa Major, the Great Bear," he said one night, his arm around her shoulders. "I used to navigate by it when I was in the high country. It always points north, steady as a compass. It must have been frightening being alone in the wilderness. Sometimes, but mostly it was peaceful. The mountains have a way of putting things in perspective. All your worries seem small when you are standing on a peak looking out over 100 miles of untouched country." He pulled her closer. "But I would not go back to that life. Not now that I have found you." Victoria nestled against his broad chest, feeling safer than she had in years. "What will we do when my aunt returns? She will not approve of us courting. She will say I am too young, or that you are not established enough, or any number of things. Let her say what she wants. You are 20 years old, Victoria, old enough to make your own choices. And I have money saved from 15 years of trapping. Not a fortune, but enough to start a life. We can buy a small place, maybe on the edge of town. You can cook for me, and I will hunt and provide. It will be simple, but it will be ours." "It sounds perfect," Victoria sighed. Isaiah tilted her chin up to look at him. "I mean it, Victoria. I am not a man who speaks idle words. When I say I want to build a life with you, I mean it with everything I am." "I know," she said, and kissed him to seal the promise. The idyll ended when Aunt Marta returned on the Saturday stage, tight-lipped and suspicious. She took one look at Victoria's glowing face and Isaiah's protective stance nearby, and her eyes narrowed. "What has been happening here while I was gone?" she demanded. "Nothing improper," Victoria said quickly. "I managed the boarding house just as you asked. All the meals were served on time, the rooms were kept clean, and the accounts are balanced. That is not what I am asking about." Aunt Marta's gaze drilled into her niece. "You look different, happy, and happiness for a girl in your position usually means trouble." Isaiah stepped forward. "Mrs. Rivera, I would like to speak with you about courting your niece." Aunt Marta's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Absolutely not. Victoria is under my care and protection. I will not allow her to be courted by a drifter with no prospects and no future." "I have prospects," Isaiah said calmly. "I have a contract with the mining company to supply fresh meat. I am making good money, enough to support a wife. And I have every intention of staying in Calico and building a life here." "A wife? You think I will allow her to marry a mountain man who smells like buckskin and has no education, no refinement, nothing to recommend him but muscle?" Aunt Marta was working herself into a rage. "Victoria deserves better than you, Mr. Nichols." "Does she?" Isaiah's voice remained level, but there was steel underneath. "She deserves to be treated with respect and kindness. She deserves to have her efforts appreciated rather than constantly criticized. She deserves to be loved, Mrs. Rivera." "Can you honestly say you provide those things?" Aunt Marta's face went red. "How dare you question me? I took this ungrateful girl in when she had nowhere else to go. I fed her and housed her and tried to teach her the skills she needs to survive. If she cannot cook a decent meal, that is her failing, not mine. She can cook just fine." Isaiah's voice rose for the first time since Victoria had known him. "Every meal she makes is good and honest and prepared with care. You have convinced her otherwise because you enjoy making her feel small. Well, no more. Victoria is coming with me, with or without your blessing. I am her legal guardian until she is 21, Aunt Marta shrieked. "I am 20, Victoria said quietly. Both adults turned to look at her. She was standing straighter than usual, her chin lifted in defiance. 20 is old enough to marry in California. I do not need your permission, Aunt Marta. I am grateful for everything you have done for me, truly I am. But Isaiah is right. You have made me feel worthless for 3 years. No matter how hard I try, it is never good enough for you. I am tired of being criticized and belittled in my own home. This is my home," Aunt Marta snapped. "Yes, and I am leaving it." Victoria moved to stand beside Isaiah, and he immediately put a protective arm around her. "I am going to marry Isaiah. We are going to build a life together. You cannot stop us." Aunt Marta sputtered, her face going from red to nearly purple. "If you leave with him, you are no niece of mine. I will never speak to you again." "I am sorry you feel that way," Victoria said, and she was surprised to find she meant it. Despite everything, Aunt Marta was family. "But I have to do this. I have to choose my own happiness." "You will regret this," Aunt Marta hissed. "He will get tired of you, or he will go back to his mountains and leave you stranded, and I will not take you back." "I do not abandon people I care about," Isaiah said quietly. "And I will spend every day of my life proving that to Victoria, if that is what it takes." He led Victoria upstairs to help her pack her few belongings. Her hands shook as she folded her 2 dresses and wrapped her mother's silver hairbrush in a cloth. This was really happening. She was leaving the only home she had known for 3 years to go with a man she had known for barely a month. But when she looked at Isaiah, saw the steadiness in his eyes and the strength in his frame, her fear faded. This was right. She knew it in her bones. They left the boarding house with Aunt Marta still sputtering threats and warnings. Several of the miners had gathered to see what the commotion was about, and they watched with interest as Isaiah carried Victoria's small trunk down the street toward the hotel. "You are staying at the hotel?" Victoria asked. "Just for tonight. Tomorrow we are going to see the justice of the peace and get married if you are willing. Then we will find a place of our own." He looked down at her, his expression serious. "Are you sure about this, Victoria? It is not too late to change your mind." "I am completely sure," she said firmly. "I love you, Isaiah. I want to be your wife." His face broke into a smile that transformed his weathered features. "Then you have made me the happiest man in California." They stayed in the hotel that night in separate rooms to maintain propriety. Victoria lay awake for hours, too excited and nervous to sleep. Tomorrow she would be married. Tomorrow her new life would begin. The next morning dawned clear and hot, typical for Calico in July. Victoria put on her best dress, a pale blue cotton that had been her mother's, and pinned up her dark hair carefully. Isaiah knocked on her door precisely at 8 o'clock, dressed in clean clothes with his beard freshly trimmed. He had even gotten a haircut, though his dark hair still touched his collar. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You look very handsome," Victoria replied, taking his arm. They walked together to the justice of the peace, a gruff old man named Judge Morrison who had seen every kind of marriage the rough mining town could produce. He looked over Isaiah and Victoria with shrewd eyes. "You sure about this, miss?" he asked Victoria. "You are not being forced." "I am very sure," Victoria said clearly. "This is my choice." "All right then. Let us get you two hitched." The ceremony was brief and simple. Isaiah produced a plain gold ring that had belonged to his mother, and he slid it onto Victoria's finger with hands that shook slightly. When Judge Morrison pronounced them man and wife, Isaiah cupped Victoria's face in his large hands and kissed her gently, reverently, as if she was something precious. "My wife," he murmured against her lips. "My husband," Victoria replied, and felt joy bubble up inside her. They spent their wedding day looking for a place to live. Isaiah's contract with the mining company was steady, and he had saved a considerable amount from his trapping years. By evening, they had found a small adobe house on the edge of town with a vegetable garden out back and a view of the desert mountains. The rent was reasonable, and it came furnished with basic necessities. "It is not much," Isaiah said as they stood in the tiny kitchen, "but we can make it home." "It is perfect," Victoria said, looking around at the small, clean space. "It is ours." That night they began their life together as husband and wife. Isaiah was gentle and patient, making sure Victoria felt safe and cherished. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Victoria thought about how different her life was now compared to just 24 hours ago. "What are you thinking?" Isaiah asked, running his fingers through her loose hair. "That I am happy. Truly happy, maybe for the first time since my parents died." "Good." He kissed the top of her head. "That is all I want, to make you happy." The next morning, Victoria woke to find Isaiah already up and making coffee over the small stove. She watched from the bedroom doorway as he moved efficiently around the kitchen, his muscular frame somehow fitting in the small space. "I can make breakfast," she offered. "I know you can, but you are going to let me take care of you this morning." He poured her a cup of coffee, adding sugar just the way she liked it. "Besides, I want to show you that I can do more than hunt and skin animals. I am a fair hand at campfire cooking." He made biscuits and bacon, and they ate together in comfortable silence at the small table. Afterward, Isaiah headed out to hunt while Victoria explored her new home more thoroughly. The house was small but well built, with thick adobe walls that kept out the worst of the desert heat. The bedroom had space for their bed and a small dresser. The kitchen had a decent stove and some shelving. The main room served as both sitting room and dining area. It was nothing like the boarding house, and certainly nothing like the home Victoria had grown up in. But it felt right. It felt like theirs. Over the next few weeks, they settled into a routine. Isaiah would leave at dawn to hunt in the cooler morning hours. He would return by midday with whatever game he had caught, selling most to the mining company, but always keeping enough for their own meals. Victoria would prepare their supper, trying new recipes and techniques without fear of criticism. And every evening, Isaiah would eat everything she made with genuine appreciation, offering suggestions but never complaints. "The venison is a bit tough," Victoria said apologetically one night. "You cooked it right. The deer was old is all, makes the meat tough no matter how you prepare it." Isaiah reached for another serving. "The potatoes are excellent though, crispy on the outside, soft inside. How did you manage that?" "I parboiled them first, then finished them in the pan with some of the fat from the meat." "Smart." Isaiah smiled at her across the table. "You are getting better every day, you know. Not that you needed to, but you have more confidence now. I can taste it in the food." Victoria realized he was right. Without Aunt Marta's constant criticism, she had relaxed in the kitchen. She experimented more, tried new things without fear of failure. And when something did not turn out quite right, Isaiah would simply help her figure out what went wrong and how to fix it next time. One evening, Isaiah came home with news. "The mining company wants me to go up into the higher mountains for a few days. There is a herd of mule deer up there, and they have asked me to bring back as much meat as I can carry. The pay is excellent." "How long will you be gone?" Victoria asked, trying to keep the anxiety from her voice. "3 days, maybe 4. I will leave you money for supplies, and I will make sure the neighbors know to check on you." He pulled her into his arms. "I do not like leaving you, but this job could set us up well for the winter months when game is scarce." "I will be fine," Victoria said, though she held him tightly. "Just promise me you will be careful. Always." Isaiah kissed her thoroughly. "And when I get back, I am not leaving your side for a week." He left the next morning, his pack loaded with supplies and his rifle slung over his broad shoulder. Victoria watched from the doorway until he disappeared into the rocky terrain, then turned back to her empty house with a sigh. The first day was not so bad. She kept busy cleaning and washing, chatting with the neighbor women who came by to make sure she was all right. Mrs. Chen stopped by with some herbs. She thought Victoria might like to try in her cooking, and they spent a pleasant hour talking in the kitchen. The second day was harder. The house felt too quiet without Isaiah's heavy footsteps and deep voice. Victoria found herself listening for his return, jumping at every sound outside. On the third day, a commotion in the street drew her attention. A group of miners were gathered near the mercantile, talking in urgent tones. Victoria stepped outside to see what was happening. "Accident up at the rattlesnake claim," one man was saying. "Cave-in. 3 men trapped." Victoria's heart began to race. "Where is the rattlesnake claim?" "Up in the high country, near where that big mountain man has been hunting." The blood drained from Victoria's face. Isaiah was up in the high country. What if he had been near the cave-in? What if he had been hurt trying to help? She spent the rest of the day in an agony of worry, unable to focus on anything. She tried to pray, but the words would not come. She tried to stay busy, but her hands shook too much to accomplish anything. All she could do was wait and worry and imagine terrible scenarios. As the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the desert, Victoria finally saw a familiar tall figure walking down the main street. She ran to him, not caring what anyone thought, and threw herself into his arms. "You are safe," she sobbed against his chest. "I heard about the cave-in and I thought something terrible had happened to you." Isaiah held her close, one hand stroking her hair. "I am all right. I was miles away when it happened, but I did help with the rescue effort once I heard. That is why I am late getting back." "Were the miners all right?" "Two of them. One did not make it." Isaiah's voice was heavy with sorrow. "I am sorry you worried. I should have sent word somehow." "It does not matter now. You are home and you are safe." Victoria pulled back to look at him. His clothes were covered in dust and there was a cut on his forehead, but his eyes were clear and steady. "Let me clean that cut." She led him home and carefully tended the wound, her hand still shaking slightly. Isaiah caught one of her hands and pressed a kiss to her palm. "I am sorry I scared you." "Promise me you will always come home," Victoria whispered. "I promise. Nothing could keep me from you." He pulled her into his lap, holding her close. "These 3 days made me realize something. I have spent 15 years wandering alone, and I always thought I was content with that. But now that I have you, I cannot imagine going back to that solitary life. You have become essential to me, Victoria. Like air or water." "You are essential to me too," Victoria said, wrapping her arms around his neck. "When I thought you might be hurt, I felt like my heart would stop beating." They held each other as the room grew dark around them, grateful for this moment of reunion and closeness. Eventually, Isaiah stirred. "You have not eaten yet, have you?" "I was too worried to eat." "Then let me take care of you for once." Isaiah carried her to the kitchen and sat her at the table. He rummaged through their supplies and managed to put together a simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried fruit. It was not fancy, but Victoria ate every bite, comforted by his presence more than the food. That night, as they lay in bed together, Isaiah said quietly, "I have been thinking. The mining company wants me to keep hunting, but I could do it closer to town. I do not need to go into the high country. There is plenty of game in the nearer hills. But the pay is better for the big hunts, is it not? The pay does not matter if it means leaving you to worry. I would rather make less money and be home every night." He turned to face her in the darkness. "You are more important than any contract, Victoria." She kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. "I do not want to hold you back from good opportunities. But I confess, I sleep better when you are beside me." "Then it is settled. I will stick to day hunts where I can be home by sunset." Over the following months, their life together deepened and settled into a comfortable rhythm. Isaiah was true to his word, taking only hunting jobs that kept him close to Calico. The mining company was happy with his work, and other restaurants and boarding houses began approaching him for fresh meat as well. Money was not abundant, but it was steady. Victoria's cooking continued to improve. She experimented with different recipes, learning what worked and what did not. Some of her experiments were disasters, and she and Isaiah would laugh together over burnt or oversalted food before starting fresh. But many were successes, and Victoria began to feel genuine pride in her abilities. One afternoon, Mrs. Chen stopped by with an unusual request. "My husband's injury has healed enough that he can go back to light work. We want to celebrate by having friends over for a meal. But I am not a good cook, and we cannot afford the hotel restaurant. Would you cook for us, Victoria?" "I will pay you." Victoria was startled by the request. "You want me to cook for you?" "I have smelled your cooking when I walk past your house. It always smells wonderful. And Mr. Nichols brags about your meals to anyone who will listen. So yes, I want you to cook." Victoria agreed, both flattered and nervous. She spent 2 days planning the menu and preparing. Isaiah helped her carry the food to the Chen's small house and then stayed for the dinner party. The guests, a mix of Chinese immigrants and American workers, ate enthusiastically and complimented everything. "This is delicious," Mr. Chen said through his wife's translation. "You should open a restaurant." The seed of an idea was planted that night. Over the next few weeks, Victoria could not stop thinking about it. Her parents had dreamed of opening a restaurant. What if she could make that dream a reality? She broached the subject with Isaiah one evening as they sat on their small porch watching the stars. "Do you think I could run a restaurant?" "I think you could do anything you set your mind to," Isaiah said immediately. "Why? Are you thinking about it?" "Maybe. I know my cooking is not fancy, but people seem to like it. And with your steady supply of fresh meat, we could offer things that other places cannot." Isaiah was quiet for a moment, thinking. "It would take money to start. We would need to rent a space, buy equipment, supplies. But I have some savings left from my trapping years. And if we are careful, if we start small, I think we could do it." Victoria turned to him, eyes shining. "You would support this? You would be willing to risk your savings on my dream?" "Our dream," Isaiah corrected, taking her hand. "I am your husband, Victoria. Your dreams are my dreams. Besides, I have been thinking it is time I found a way to contribute beyond just hunting. I am good with wood and building things. I could make furniture, shelving, whatever the restaurant needs. We could do this together." They spent the next several months planning and saving. Isaiah took extra hunting jobs, working longer hours to build up their funds. Victoria experimented with recipes, practicing dishes over and over until she had them perfected. They looked at several possible locations before finding a small building just off the main street. It had been a trading post once, but had sat empty for years. The rent was cheap because it needed work, but Isaiah was not daunted. "I can fix it up," he said, examining the sagging roof and cracked windows. "Give me 2 months and it will be a proper restaurant." He was true to his word. Every evening after his hunting was done, Isaiah would go to the building and work on repairs. He fixed the roof, replaced broken windows, built tables and benches from scrap lumber. Victoria helped when she could, painting walls and scrubbing floors until everything shone. They decided to call it the Mountain Table, in honor of Isaiah's background and the fresh mountain game they would feature. Victoria painted the sign herself, proud of the neat letters. The restaurant opened on a crisp October morning in 1877. Victoria was terrified, sure that no one would come. But Isaiah stood beside her, steady as always. "Even if no one comes today, they will come eventually. Your food is good, Victoria. People will figure that out." But people did come. Mrs. Chen and her husband were their first customers, spreading the word to their community. The mining company sent workers who had tasted Isaiah's game before and wanted more. Word spread that the Mountain Table served honest, hearty food at fair prices, and soon they had a steady stream of customers. One day, about 3 weeks after opening, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Aunt Marta stood there, looking older and more tired than Victoria remembered. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Finally, Aunt Marta said, "I heard you opened a restaurant." "Yes." Victoria stood straighter, preparing for criticism. "I also heard the food is good. Better than what my boarding house serves." Aunt Marta's expression was difficult to read. "I came to see for myself." Victoria seated her aunt at a corner table and brought her the day's special, venison stew with fresh vegetables and her own fluffy biscuits. She watched nervously as Aunt Marta took the first bite. Aunt Marta chewed slowly, then took another bite, and another. She ate the entire bowl of stew and 2 biscuits before finally setting down her spoon. "This is good," she said quietly. "Very good. Your mother would be proud." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, Aunt Marta. I was wrong about you." The admission seemed to cost Aunt Marta greatly. "Wrong about your cooking and wrong about your mountain man. He is a good provider and a good husband. Anyone can see that. And you. You have done well for yourself, Victoria, better than I ever gave you credit for." "Would you like to come to dinner sometime?" Victoria asked tentatively. "At our house. A proper family meal." Aunt Marta nodded stiffly. "I would like that." It was not a complete reconciliation, but it was a start. Over the following months, Aunt Marta became a regular customer at the mountain table, and occasionally she would join Victoria and Isaiah for Sunday dinner. The relationship was still sometimes strained, but the open hostility had faded. The restaurant thrived. Victoria's reputation as a good, honest cook spread beyond Calico. People would travel from nearby towns to try her venison chili or her rabbit pie. Isaiah's fresh game was a major draw, but Victoria's skill in preparing it kept customers coming back. One evening in early 1878, as they were closing up the restaurant, Victoria noticed that Isaiah seemed preoccupied. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "No, nothing wrong, just thinking." He pulled her close, his large hand spanning her waist. "Thinking that I am happier than I ever imagined possible. Thinking that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. And thinking that I hope we might have children someday." Victoria smiled, pressing closer to him. "Funny you should mention that. I have been feeling strange lately. Tired, a bit queasy in the mornings, and I am late." Isaiah pulled back to look at her, his eyes widening. "Are you saying—" "I think I might be pregnant. I was planning to see the doctor tomorrow to be sure." Isaiah let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way down the street. He picked Victoria up and spun her around, then immediately set her down again carefully. "I am sorry, I should not have done that. What if I hurt the baby?" Victoria laughed, delighted by his instant protectiveness. "I am fine. The baby is fine. It is very early yet." "A baby?" Isaiah breathed, wonder in his voice. He placed one large hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Victoria, you have made me the happiest man alive." The doctor confirmed her pregnancy the next day. The baby would arrive in late summer, around August. Isaiah became even more protective, insisting Victoria sit down whenever possible and refusing to let her lift anything heavy. Victoria found it both endearing and occasionally frustrating. "I am pregnant, not fragile," she reminded him when he tried to carry a sack of flour that she was perfectly capable of lifting. "I know, but humor me. This is our first child, and I want to make sure nothing happens to either of you." As Victoria's pregnancy progressed, they made plans. Isaiah built a cradle from smooth pine, sanding it until there was not a single rough edge. Victoria sewed tiny clothes, marveling at how small they were. They talked about names and futures and what kind of parents they wanted to be. The mountain table continued to operate, though Victoria gradually did less of the heavy cooking as her pregnancy advanced. She hired a young woman named Susan to help in the kitchen, teaching her recipes and techniques. Isaiah took on more of the front-of-house work when he was not hunting. On a hot August afternoon, Victoria's pains began. Isaiah sent for the doctor and Mrs. Chen, who had experience with births, then held Victoria's hand through the long hours of labor. He whispered encouragement, wiped her forehead, and stayed by her side even when the doctor suggested he might want to wait outside. "I am not leaving her," Isaiah said firmly, and Victoria gripped his hand tighter in gratitude. Their son was born just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. He was large and healthy, with a good strong cry and a shock of dark hair. Isaiah held him with trembling hands, his weathered face transformed by wonder. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Jacob Isaiah Nichols. Jacob after Victoria's father, Isaiah after his own. The boy was the image of his father, with the same strong features and the promise of the same large frame. Motherhood suited Victoria. She took to it with the same determination she had applied to learning to cook. Jacob was a good baby, healthy and happy. Isaiah was a devoted father, often strapping the boy to his back when he went out hunting, teaching him about the wilderness from the earliest age. The mountain table continued to prosper. Victoria returned to cooking after a few months, bringing Jacob with her and setting up a small bed where he could nap while she worked. Customers cooed over the baby and business remained steady. 2 years later, Victoria gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose Marie. She had Victoria's delicate features and dark eyes, and Isaiah fell completely in love with her. Victoria watched with amusement as this large, strong mountain man was reduced to putty by a tiny baby girl. "She has you completely under her control," Victoria teased one evening, watching Isaiah rock Rose to sleep with infinite gentleness. "I know," Isaiah admitted without shame, "and I do not mind one bit." Their family was complete. Jacob grew into a sturdy boy who loved following his father into the hills, learning to track and hunt. Rose was quieter, more likely to be found in the kitchen with Victoria, already showing an interest in cooking. Both children were healthy and happy, raised with love and security. The restaurant remained successful year after year. Victoria's reputation as an excellent cook spread throughout Southern California. People came from as far as Los Angeles to eat at the mountain table. They trained more staff, expanded the dining room, and eventually bought the building outright. Isaiah continued to hunt, though as he got older, he took Jacob with him more often, teaching his son the skills that had kept him alive in the wilderness for so many years. He never went back to his solitary mountain life, content instead with his family and his place in the community. Years passed in a blur of happy routines. Jacob grew tall and strong like his father, eventually taking over much of the hunting business. Rose became an exceptional cook, working alongside her mother and eventually managing the restaurant on the days Victoria wanted to rest. One evening, when Victoria was 40 and Isaiah was in his early 50s, they sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. Their children were grown now, both married with families of their own. Jacob had built a house just outside town with his wife, while Rose and her husband lived above the restaurant. "You ever regret it?" Victoria asked, leaning against Isaiah's broad shoulder. "Giving up your mountain life for all this?" Isaiah was quiet for a moment, considering. "Not for one single moment. Those mountains were beautiful and I am grateful for the years I spent there. But they were just a place, Victoria. You are my home. You and our children and the life we built together. That is worth more than all the wilderness in the world." "I love you," Victoria said softly. "I have loved you since that first night when you ate my terrible cooking and said it was good." Isaiah chuckled, the sound rumbling deep in his chest. "It was good, not because of the recipe or the seasoning, but because you made it with care. I could taste that even then." "Aunt Marta was wrong," Victoria mused. "When she said I could not cook a decent meal, I just needed someone who appreciated my efforts. Your aunt came around eventually, and I think she was happy at the end, knowing you had succeeded." Aunt Marta had passed away 2 years earlier, at peace with her niece and proud of what Victoria had accomplished. She had left the boarding house to Victoria in her will, which they had sold to fund a scholarship for young women wanting to learn trades. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over the desert mountains. Those same stars Isaiah had navigated by during his years of solitude now shone down on the family he had built, the community he had joined, the life he had chosen. "Tell me again," Victoria said, as she had asked many times over the years, "about that first meal I cooked for you, the beans and cornbread." "You were so nervous," Isaiah recalled, smiling at the memory. "Standing in that kitchen with your aunt criticizing you, worried that nothing you made would be good enough. But I took one bite and I knew. I knew you were someone special, someone who put care and heart into everything she did, even something as simple as beans. And I thought to myself, this is a woman worth knowing, a woman worth loving. And you ate every bite and asked for more," Isaiah finished, pulling her closer. "Best decision I ever made." Victoria tilted her face up to kiss him, this man who had seen her worth when everyone else saw only failure. This mountain man who had come down from his solitary peaks to build a life with her. This husband who had stood by her through every challenge and celebrated every success. The next morning they walked together to the mountain table. The restaurant was busy as always, with Rose managing the kitchen staff and the dining room full of happy customers. Victoria watched her daughter work, seeing so much of herself in the young woman's confident movements. "She is a better cook than I ever was," Victoria said to Isaiah. "She learned from the best," Isaiah replied. "You taught her that cooking is about more than just following recipes. It is about care and love and wanting to nourish people." A young couple came in, clearly new to town. They looked tired and uncertain, the way Victoria had once looked when she first arrived in Calico. She watched as Rose seated them and brought them water, speaking kindly to put them at ease. "You remember when we were like that?" Victoria asked Isaiah. "Young and starting out with nothing but hope in each other." "I remember everything," Isaiah said, taking her hand. "I remember a girl who could not cook to please her aunt, but who cooked with such heart that I fell in love with her. I remember building this restaurant from nothing, working side by side until we made it succeed. I remember the birth of our children, the growth of our family, every day we have spent together, and I would not change a single moment." Victoria squeezed his hand, her eyes misting. "Neither would I." They stayed at the restaurant through the lunch rush, Victoria occasionally offering suggestions, but mostly just watching with pride as Rose ran things with confident competence. In the afternoon, they walked home through the streets of Calico. The town had grown considerably since Victoria first arrived, but it still had that frontier feeling, that sense of possibility. Their house was the same one they had rented when they first married, though they had bought it years ago and made many improvements. The garden Victoria had planted now flourished, providing fresh vegetables for the restaurant. The porch where they had spent so many evenings had been expanded and reinforced by Isaiah's capable hands. Inside, the walls were covered with memories, drawings the children had made as little ones. A photograph of the whole family taken 2 years ago, the sign from their restaurant's opening day now replaced but saved for sentiment. "We have had a good life," Victoria said, looking around at the evidence of their years together. "We have," Isaiah agreed. "And we will have many more good years ahead. I intend to sit on that porch with you until we are both old and gray, telling stories to our grandchildren about how their grandmother could not cook to save her life when we met." "I could too cook," Victoria protested, laughing. "Could not," Isaiah teased, pulling her into his arms. "Your aunt said so herself. She cannot cook a decent meal, she told me. And yet you ate every bite and asked for more." "Because I was smarter than everyone else," Isaiah said, kissing her soundly. "I saw what they could not. That the cooking did not matter. What mattered was the woman doing the cooking. And she was extraordinary. Victoria melted into his embrace, grateful beyond words for this man who had chosen her, believed in her, and loved her unconditionally. They had built something beautiful together, something lasting. A family, a business, a life filled with love and purpose. That evening, their children and grandchildren came for dinner. Jacob brought his wife and their 3 boys, all of them tall and strong like their father and grandfather. Rose and her husband arrived with their 2 daughters, both of them already showing promise in the kitchen. Victoria cooked, as she always did for family gatherings. The meal was simple but perfect. Roasted venison from Jacob's hunt, vegetables from the garden, fresh bread, and her famous berry pie. Everyone ate with enthusiasm, complimenting the food and asking for seconds. Isaiah ate heartily as always, and when his plate was clean, he held it out to Victoria with a smile. "More, please." Everyone laughed, because they knew the story. The children had heard it 100 times, how their grandfather had fallen in love with their grandmother because he appreciated her cooking when no one else did. How he had seen past the surface to the heart underneath. How he had changed her life by simply believing in her. "More for me too, Grandma," the children chorused, and Victoria's heart swelled with joy as she served them all. After dinner, they sat on the porch together, 3 generations of family. The children played in the yard while the adults talked. Isaiah held Victoria's hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her palm. "Tell us the story again, Grandpa," one of Jacob's boys pleaded, "about how you met Grandma." Isaiah settled back in his chair, Victoria still holding his hand. "Well, now, I was a mountain man, see. Spent 15 years up in the high country, trapping and hunting and living free. But I was lonely, though I did not know it at the time. Then one day I came down to Calico looking for work, and I met your grandmother." Victoria listened to him tell the story she knew by heart, watching the children's rapt faces. She saw the love in Rose's eyes as she looked at her own husband, the protectiveness in Jacob's expression as he watched his boys. This family, this beautiful family, had grown from that first meal, that first moment when Isaiah had chosen to see her worth. As the stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had watched over them for so many years, Victoria knew with complete certainty that her life had turned out exactly as it was meant to. She had gone from being a girl who could not cook a decent meal to a woman who fed her community, raised a beautiful family, and built a legacy that would continue long after she was gone. And it had all started because one mountain man had eaten every bite of her simple cooking and asked for more, seeing in that plain meal the heart of the woman who made it. That one act of kindness had changed everything, had given her the confidence and courage to become who she was meant to be. Isaiah caught her looking at him and smiled, that warm smile that still made her heart flutter even after all these years. "What are you thinking about, my love?" "About beans and cornbread," Victoria said, smiling back, "and about the man who was kind enough to appreciate them." "Best meal I ever had," Isaiah said, and pulled her close to kiss her temple. "Because it was made by you." Around them, their family laughed and talked and lived, a testament to the love that had started in a boarding house kitchen so many years ago. The night grew dark, but the porch was warm with love and light and the promise of many more years together. Victoria rested her head on Isaiah's broad shoulder, feeling his strength and steadiness, and thanked God for the day Aunt Marta had been wrong. She had been able to cook a decent meal after all. She had just needed someone who loved her enough to taste it properly. And Isaiah had been that someone, her mountain man who came down from his peaks to build a life with her, who defended her when no one else would, who ate every bite of her cooking and always, always asked for more. That was true love. Not the dramatic, passionate kind from stories, but the steady, enduring kind that grew stronger with every passing year. The kind that built families and businesses and legacies. The kind that lasted forever. And as Victoria sat surrounded by the family they had created, the life they had built together, she knew with absolute certainty that she was the luckiest woman in California. Not because she had become a successful restaurateur, or because she had mastered the art of cooking, but because she had found a man who loved her exactly as she was, who saw her potential when even she could not see it herself. The evening wound down eventually, with children being carried to wagons and goodbyes being said. Jacob promised to bring by a deer he had spotted earlier that week. Rose reminded them that she had the restaurant covered for the next few days if they wanted to rest. Finally, Victoria and Isaiah were alone again, standing on their porch under the vast desert sky. Isaiah wrapped his arms around his wife and they swayed gently, dancing to music only they could hear. "Happy?" Isaiah asked softly. "Extraordinarily," Victoria replied. "You more than I can say." He kissed the top of her head. "Thank you, Victoria." "For what?" "For giving an old mountain man a chance. For seeing past the rough exterior to the heart underneath. For building this beautiful life with me. For everything." "Thank you for eating my terrible cooking all those years ago," Victoria said, laughing softly, "and for being stubborn enough to keep asking for more." "It was never terrible," Isaiah insisted one more time. "It was perfect, just like you." They stood together in the darkness, two souls who had found each other against all odds in a rough mining town in the California desert. A mountain man who had left his solitary life behind, and a young woman who had learned to believe in herself. Together they had built something extraordinary, something that would endure long after they were gone. And it had all started with a simple meal, eaten with appreciation and love. Inside their cozy house, Victoria eventually made them both tea, and they sat at their small kitchen table, the same table where they had shared so many meals over the years. She watched Isaiah's weathered, beloved face in the lamplight and marveled again at how her life had turned out. "Do you remember what you said to me that first week?" Victoria asked. "About how a person who cooks with care is worth 10 fancy cooks." "I meant every word. Still do." "You gave me my confidence back, Isaiah. You made me believe I could do anything. Not just cook, but run a business, raise children, build a life. All because you believed in me first." Isaiah reached across the table to take her hand. "You always had it in you, Victoria. I just helped you see it." They finished their tea in comfortable silence, then went to bed, lying close together as they had every night for over 20 years. Victoria listened to Isaiah's steady breathing and felt his warmth beside her, and she said a prayer of gratitude for this man, this life, this extraordinary gift she had been given. The next morning began like any other. Isaiah went hunting while Victoria tended her garden and prepared for the day. But it was not just another ordinary day. It was one more day of their beautiful, hard-won, deeply cherished life together. One more day of love and partnership and joy. And when Isaiah returned that afternoon with fresh rabbits and a kiss for his wife, Victoria prepared them for supper with all the skills she had developed over the years. She added herbs and spices, carefully tended the cooking fire, and plated the meal with care. When she set it before Isaiah, he ate every bite, savoring each mouthful. And when his plate was clean, he looked at her with those green eyes that still made her heart skip a beat and said the words he had said 1,000 times before, the words that meant more than any fancy compliment ever could. "More, please." And Victoria smiled and served him more, and knew that she was loved completely and forever by a man who had seen her worth when no one else could. A mountain man who had traded his wilderness for a home, his solitude for a family, his wandering for a purpose, all because of her. They had many more years together, Isaiah and Victoria Nichols. Years filled with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with the continued success of the mountain table, with quiet evenings on their porch and busy days full of purpose. They grew old together, their hair turning silver, their bodies slowing but their love remaining as strong as ever. And through it all, at every meal Victoria prepared, Isaiah ate with appreciation and asked for more. Not because he was particularly hungry, but because he knew what it meant to her. That simple request was his way of saying, "I love you. I believe in you. You are enough." And Victoria understood, always serving him with a smile and a full heart. Their story became legend in Calico. The mountain man and the girl who could not cook. The unlikely love story that had resulted in one of the most successful restaurants in Southern California. But to Victoria and Isaiah, it was simply their life. The life they had chosen, the life they had built together, one meal at a time. And when they were very old, sitting on their porch with great-grandchildren playing at their feet, Victoria would sometimes lean over to Isaiah and whisper, "Do you remember that first meal?" And Isaiah would always smile, squeeze her hand and reply, "How could I forget? It was the meal that changed my life, the meal that led me to you. Beans and cornbread," Victoria would say, shaking her head in wonder. "The best beans and cornbread ever made," Isaiah would insist, "because they were made by you." And they would sit together in the fading light, grateful for every moment, every meal, every day they had been given together. Two people who had found each other when they needed it most, who had built something beautiful from the simplest of beginnings, who had proven that love and belief could overcome any obstacle. That was their story. That was their legacy. And it would endure for generations, a testament to the power of seeing and being seen, of giving and receiving love, of something as simple as appreciating a meal made with care. Isaiah Nichols, the mountain man who came down from his peaks, and Victoria Ortega, the girl who learned to believe in herself. Together they had created magic from ordinary ingredients, had built a life from simple moments, had proven that the greatest love stories are not the dramatic ones, but the steady, enduring ones that grow deeper with time. And it had all started because he ate every bite and asked for more.